Good evening and welcome to tonight's shiur. I happen to be actually now in Edgware, the middle of a bar mitzvah of Ben Sion Ben Zalman, Reb Zalman Sudak, a shliach here in Edgware. I've come out for a couple of minutes to keep the kviyas of the shiur. So thank you for joining us, and let's go into our question. I think some weeks ago I shared with you my concern about the double expression here, למען גדלך ותפארתך. Why in Hoshanos and in Selichos we have this alphabetical list of requests, and all of them are single words, although you've got Rabim, which is descriptive, but a double request of גדלך ותפארתך that bothered me. And one night this past week, I was saying Krishma Shalamita, trying to fall asleep, and I'm saying this Rebbeinu Shalom, it says, V'odem oleha v'roso, just before Hamapil, V'odem oleha v'roso, v'nafachto b'yapay nishmas chayim, you created a human on this world, and you breathed in him a spirit of life. למען yakir גדלך ותפארתך. He should recognize your greatness and your glory. So I saw again this גדלך ותפארתך, and was thinking that's interesting. And so now it reminded me of the pasuk in Esther, in Megillah Esther, right at the beginning. Bahar oisoi es kavod malchusoi, when Hachashverosh is celebrating and showing the glory of his kingdom, as you kortif eres gdulosoi. Again, the glory of his kingdom, his greatness, and he had the celebration for 180 days, which is a half a year. So here again, you got Tiferes Gedulosai. So coming together, Tiferes and Gedulah. On this is my attempted explanation. On this, we have here the Mechir Yayin, is a commentary on the Megillah written by the Ramah, the one who had written the commentary on the Shulchan Aruch to update it to Minig Ashkenaz. He also wrote a pirush. He was a Mekubal as well as a halachist, and he wrote a pirush on the Megillah called Mechir Yayin. So here he looks at these various titles of Oishe, Kvoid, Malchusoi, Tiferes, Gdulosoi, and he says the following: we have in the pasuk in Yirmiyah that the wise person should not boast because of his wisdom, and the chacham should not be proud with his the gibor bigvorosoi and ha'osher be'oshroi. You got these qualities. You got wisdom, knowledge. You got wealth. You got strength. That's not the real Maila. The real Maila is Haskell v'yodoya, you see, connecting with Hashem. So what I'm suggesting here is that had it just written in the Hoshanos, as it was actually in the older, very old versions, it had just למען גדלך. But greatness can be greatness in power, being greatness in wealth, in expanse. And we are appealing to Hashem's greatness, which is a greater greatness than just a quantifiable greatness in space or in strength. We're talking about the true Maila, the greatness of Hashem, and therefore we want to say it's Gdlech ותפארתך, your glory, which is kind of descriptive, defining the Gdlech. We mean a Gdlech which is a true Tiferes, not just a Gdlech which is a physical power or some quantifiable power. If someone has a better biur, I'm always happy to listen. Here's a practical question, a very a question mishpat question. A couple of girls live in, let's say, in Yerushalayim, and they are coming home to spend Yomtov with their parents, so their apartment's going to be vacant. And so they put up a little notice somewhere, that apartment for rent and for over Succos. And a couple from overseas call them, and yes, we are interested, agree a price, and then they had reserved that they're going to rent this apartment, this flat in Yerushalayim over Yomtov. Erev Sukkos, they get a call, these girls get a call from the prospective tenant and says, I'm sorry, my husband's not feeling so well, and we're not sure whether we're going to be able to take it. And then Chalamoyed, they confirm that due to illness is not able to take it. And so here's the question. They're asking, are they entitled to payment for the rental, which was never realized? This is really their question. So here we have, I did find this directly addressed, and there's a sefer, a contemporary sefer called Psokim Umishpotim or something like that. Very recent sefer, which has very real and contemporary questions in halacha. And this was really with COVID, the beginning of COVID, this was a very, very common question of cancellations and deposits, etc. And so he compares it to a din in Shulchan Aruch, which is in the Mishnah in Bava Metzia. When you hired workers, if you hired workers, they should come to do watering a field. And they come in the morning of when they're hired for, and they come and they see that either it's saturated or they see that there's been a rain or whatever it may be, and they're not needed. So here is the rule is, if the employer did his due diligence and he came the night before and checked out the day before, and he checked that indeed it does need workers, and the next morning circumstances have changed, so here we say, Ein la poyalim kulum. They can't have any claim against the employer. Or maybe what did you want him to do? He did he did his due diligence. He checked out in the evening before, and the fact that things changed by the morning, that was beyond his control. The next shift talks about if you cancel and you can have a rehire in between or not. The kids what we have here, the following, is that all of this, the claim of the workers against their employer for breaking the contract, is only if it was bipshi osoi, if it was through his neglect. But if there's nothing of neglect, you can't fault the balabais, the employer, with neglect. Onus. So then his breaking the contract is beyond his control, v'niftor, and he actually is acquitted. So that's really what remains here. Had they taken the deposit, then it would have been a different story perhaps. Had there been some formal agreement, what happens if you cancel? There hadn't been. They're not into this business. It's just they had their apartment, which they pay for rent every year, and they just wanted to get a bit of money over the Yomtov period. But it looks like, that was my conclusion, that they would not be entitled to any money because the failure to fulfill the contract was due to illness, and therefore you can't claim why didn't they honor the contract. Okay, let's go on to the next question, and that is about, I know it's Succos, but okay, that's where we're coming from. And that is about making Kiddush early on the second night of Succos. That is the question here. So the first night of Succos, you don't do Kiddush early, and the reason being that you can only, I think we went through this, you can be makabel isur melocha early, but you can't make it Succos early. It doesn't become Succos. And therefore, you have the mitzvah of eating the kazayis in the sukkah, just like the first night of Pesach, you have to eat a kazayis matzah after nightfall. So the first night of Sukkot, you have to eat a kazayis of bread in the sukkah after nightfall. And it is on this mitzvah that you say shechionu. Shechionu is part of Kiddush. So you can't do Kiddush early because shechionu then will not be associated with the mitzvah of Leishav Sukkah, which only starts, so to speak, fully with the confidence after nightfall. So therefore, the first night, that's clear. Now, the problem here is the second night of Sukkot. The second night of Sukkot, the Shechionu is said before Leishav Sukkah. And that's because that's our minig, and many have that minig. And because of the Shechianu said before Leishav Sukkah, so then why can't you do Kiddush early and say Shechianu, and then a little bit later have some challah and do your Leishav Sukkah? This is kind of the discussion. And here we have the Lashon of the Ramah in Tofresh Lametes, the first night. So he lived in Krakow. Does he mean just the first night, or does he mean the first nights? So here the Mishnah Berurah in the Bir Halocho discusses this. And he says, possibly, he quotes from Pri Megadim, the second night, since you're saying first Shechianu, then Sukkah, then you could do possibly Kiddush earlier, and you'd say Shechianu at Kiddush, and you'd have your Hamoitzi a little bit later, or after nightfall. Then he entertains that possibly you should be allowed to even have your Hamoitzi during Bein Hashmoshes, not before sunset, but during twilight. You should be allowed to, just like Sfiras Ha'omer is, many communities will do Sfiras Ha'omer Bein Hashmoshes. The reason being, Sfiras Ha'omer is midrabanan, and we have a rule, a sofek d'Rabbanon, we take the lenient view. So, okay, just like sofek d'Rabbanon is the cooler, and therefore you can do Sfiras Ha'omer during Bein Hashmoshes. It's sofek yom, sofek laila, so you can do Sfiras Ha'omer during twilight. So the same thing, the second night of Succos, which is the mitzvah, is second day of Yomtov, is clearly only midrabanan. Therefore, you should be allowed to fulfill the mitzvah of eating the first kazayis, so to speak, after nightfall. That for after sunset should be enough. That is one way of looking at it. Then the Mishnah Berurah says the other way, that I'm not so sure about that, because Sfiras Ha'omer is entirely the Rabbanon. Every day is the Rabbanon. Perhaps the idea of eating a sukkah, the first night's deraisa. Therefore, perhaps the second night shouldn't be different to the first night. So really, the Mishnah Berurah struggles with this, and it looks like the bottom line is that one should make a point of having the beginning of the meal, the first kazayis of challah, should be after nightfall, the second night of Sukkos also. And as a result, there's no point in making Kiddush much earlier, because most of us are kind of programmed that as soon as we've eaten, as soon as we've made Kiddush, we expect to be able to eat challah right away. Let's go on to the next question. That is, I got a WhatsApp before Simchas Torah on Hoshana Rabbah, and it was a list of pointers for running a successful Simchas Torah. It was written in Ivrit, so it's geared primarily to Hebrew-speaking community. It doesn't matter. Overall, the points I think were very, very good points. Points about singing and that. But one of the things which he wrote there is about having Lechayim in the shul whilst you're having hakafas. Okay. But then he goes into a bit more detail of having a bottle of Lechayim on the Bima. And if you're worried that the velvet cover will get ruined by the spilt Lechayim, so then he recommends you get a plastic cover over the velvet. Okay, so this bothered me a little bit, whether this is legitimate stuff to be putting a bottle of vodka on the Shulchan Akriya, on the Bima where you place the Sifrei Torah. Yesterday morning I had posted these questions and the Hebrew session, Hebrew shiur, and one shliach sent me that 20 years ago they had received a new Sifrei Torah for Rosh Hashanah, and on Simchas Torah, the Sifrei Torah was on the business by day, obviously, and people were saying Lechayim, and someone was holding a glass of vodka, and someone pushed him somehow. Don't ask why that happened, but it was Simchas Torah, and sadly, the liquid, the vodka, landed on the open Sifrei Torah, and it actually ruined several columns of the writing. And since then, they've made an amendment, a bylaw, that they don't have any mashka anywhere near the open Sifrei Torah, which I think makes perfect sense. But we're coming back to the question, is it legitimate to put down a bottle of vodka on the Bima? By extension, I once put down my hat on the Bima, and I think it was Rebula Libra of Alav Shalom who pointed out to me that it's not appropriate. You don't put your hat on the Bima. So let's read this inside the Shulchan Aruch. This is Siman Kuf Nun Dalet, talks about the Oroin and the various appurtenances for the Sifrei Torah. You could make a t'nai, a condition, a proviso that you should be permitted to do other things other than just the sacred use for Sifrei Torah. And indeed, the Ramah adds it's customary to do various things with the things in the shul, the covers for the sforim and the etc. And the reason why people are lenient is because since it's become so widespread that people will use the Bima cover for other things, and it's you can't expect the people to be totally careful about this. So leiv based in masna lein meikara. It's as if there's been a clause that this should be permitted, but it's not a total kedusha. So this explains why, for example, in many shuls, well, certainly sidurim and not just Sifrei Torah are put on the Bima, but even the tzedakah pushkas, tzedakah boxes, they're not sacred as such. But since they are there in the shul for encouraging mitzvah of tzedakah, etc., so it's common that they are put on the Bima, and so that's legitimate because of leiv based in masne. The Mishnah Berurah quotes the El Yerabba. So here we have at the bottom of the screen, we've got the El Yerabba, who writes the following: that permission to use the Bima, etc., for other things is a doichik. It's under duress. We've found this heter. And then he adds the dafke b'mashe mevura min hogalahokil. Those kind of uses, which is well known that people take the liberty of using the Bima for, that you can do. But that which is not common practice to use the Bima for, you may not use the Bima for because of the Kedusha. So although there is a Tanai, so to speak, it's not totally Kadosh, but still to use it for not the regular uses, so then you wouldn't be allowed to. So on that basis, to put your hat down on the Bima is not appropriate. Besides just not derech eretz, but it's also because it's got a Kedusha. And similarly, the bottle of mashke and the vodka, as sacred as vodka on the Simchas Torah may be, but it doesn't justify having it on the Bima because of the kedusha of the Bima for what it's designated for. Okay, let's now go on to another Simchas Torah question, and here's the other end of the spectrum. Here we talk that Lechayim was obviously only for adults, but here we're talking about inflatable Sifrei Torah for children. They used to have these cloth cuddly Sifrei Torah. In my age, we used to have printed Sifrei Torah when you would roll back and forth. What's become more popular, these cuddly ones. But of late, there's a new innovation, and they are inflatable plastic Sifrei Torah. So I know of a shliach who bought about 100 of them to give out to the children who are coming to Hakofas, beautiful. And 100 inflatable ones means they have to be inflated somehow. Are you allowed to inflate those things on Yomtov, Shabbos or Yomtov? So this also will include various inflatables. Let's say inflatable mattress, a ball, a balloon. So balloons are usually tied with a knot, and therefore that's out of the question. You can't tie a knot. There are ways of doing balloons without making a knot. There's like the twisty around a stick end, special sticks for supporting balloons. Would you be allowed to blow up such a balloon? So there could be an argument it is kind of a tikkun keli. The balloon is made to entertain in its full blown out form, and when it's just a little squashy thing in a bag, so then it's not fulfilling its purpose. So you've kind of brought it to its shlemus. So there is an argument not to blow up balloons on Shabbos and Yomtov, even beyond the question of tying a knot. What here you have in Siman Shiur Mem, in the Piskei Teshuvos, the last paragraph, if on the screen, he says, I want to draw a distinction. There are the inflatables, which are just inflatables, and then you deflate them and you put them back. And there are those inflatables which are usually for a prolonged period. And so to inflate something which is just for the few minutes whilst you're playing and then you're going to deflate it, that would be okay. That's not called tikkun keli. Whereas the kind of inflatable which you would keep inflated for a prolonged period, then that should be seen as a tikkun keli. It's like he mentions here in the context about stuffing feathers or other stuffing into a cushion. Would that be allowed on Shabbos? The cushion here, it's a pillowcase of sorts, and it's not usable as a pillow. And now by stuffing the stuffing, you're making it into a usable pillow. So it's a tikkun keli. You're fixing up something, a usable item. And so similarly, I guess so with a mattress or something like that, might be a problem of tikkun keli. Okay, that's that. Let's go on to the next thing, which is, I found something surprising this week, and that is about folding serviettes or American napkins into, let's say, the shape of a bird or something. So we all know what the word origami is, and that is like folding paper into shape of a ship, shape of a boat, or a hat, or etc. And there is discussion about, and that's what the Shmiras Shabbos Selichos says in the lower quote, not to make toys out of folding paper like a boat or a hat, because it's like making a keli. But in the earlier quote, which is Perek Lamed Aleph, Perek Yud Aleph, so he writes that you should not fold serviettes in a particular shape, as one would do for hosting guests. You can fold them just plain, but not to form something like this is a bird or something. That's what he seems to be saying. He's quoting in Kuf Samach Gimel, and there's notes. He's quoting from Rav Auerbach, Rav Shlomo Zalman. He says, Doime lebinyan, folding in the form of a bird or something is like you're constructing a bird. Now, here's quite interesting that Rabbi Yugasil Forecast sein gesund disagrees with this psak, and he says that boiner, the term boiner means taking various components and bringing them together. That's what a building is. You take bricks and you stick them together and you have a structure. Making plats, taking strands of hair and creating a structure is boiner. Making cheese, you take particles, the milk solids, you mash them together and you created a block of cheese. Is boiner. But to take a piece of paper and fold it where there's no boiner there, are you going to say that it's like you're taking keli, you're making a keli? So he says, since it's not going to be last, it's going to be put at the table, and 5 minutes after the people have sat down, they're going to be dismantled. They're going to be just using for wiping their hands, etc. Because it's so short term, he says it is okay. So I found that surprising, but it's good to share. Interesting psak. So Shmiras Shabbos Selichos is actually machmer on this, and Rav Forkash, in a very respectful way, but disagrees. He says it is okay. Question number 7, and that is, I've been asked, what's the significance of the barcode on our talesim? Chabad talesim have got particular type of stripes, different to. But actually, I was tempted. You might find this funny, but I was tempted to take a Lubavitcher talis into a store, into a shop, and ask them to scan it with their barcode and to see what numbers it comes up with. I didn't get round to that, and if anyone does, I dare you, and tell me what results you come up with. But meanwhile, what is the background to the particular Chabad style is actually a Munkacher style. And the Rebbe Rashab apparently at one stage had gotten a Munkacher talis, and he liked it, and that's how it became the Lubavitch style. But actually, it's nothing specifically Lubavitch about it, other than, it's been adopted for the last century approximately. The general minhag of having stripes on the towels, black stripes. So here we have on the screen from Rabbi Yochanan Gorari's sefer called Tzitzis Halocho L'Maaseh, And he says, there are those who have accustomed to color the edge of the talus, zeichel tcheles, as a commemoration for the tcheles, which the tcheles had a remembrance, like a reminder of the sky, and therefore the tcheles is presumed to be blue. Or some do a black color, and then in the notes there's a lot of discussion what exactly is the color of tcheles. Although we normally think it's blue, some there's different versions about this. And so basically this is the reason for the black stripes on Taskot and Tasgodel. It is zeichel tcheles. Then we have there the note. Then he says further, those who are particular that it should be totally white. The towel should be totally white without any other color. Now, in the notes, he gives a reference to the memoirs of the late Rabbi Yudel Chitrik. Rabbi Chitrik got married around 1924 in communist Russia, and he needed to get hold of a talus. And where he was, there was no talesim available. And he writes how he wrote a letter to Dubrovna. He was involved in fundraising for the yeshiva at the time, and so there was a contact in Dubrovna, and he knew that back in the day of the Simchas Tzedek had a colleague called Reb Nehemiah Fradkin, was known more well known as Divrei Nehemiah, and he was not a Rov. He declined to be a Rov. Instead, he was a fabricant of talesim. He was a manufacturer, he had a factory in Dubrovna making talesim. So Rabbi Chitrik, many years after Rabbi Nehemiah Fradkin's times, writes a letter to Dubrovna, and he asks, is there still a factory of talesim in Dubrovna? And if there is, am I able to ask you can I buy a talus and you can send it to me? The fellow, his contact, who was like the Gaber tzedakah in Dubrovna, writes back, yes, indeed there is. And I actually run that factory. Unfortunately, we've run out of black thread. So the talesim which we're producing now are just white. But I'd like to reassure you that there's a very prominent Rov in Yekaterinoslav, or I'm not sure whether it was Dnepropetrovsk. That's Rebbe Levi Yitzchok Raskin's son, the Rebbe's father. He didn't say the Rebbe's father at the time. This is 1924. He says he's very respected, and he actually, back in the day, had asked me dafka to make a talus only white without any black stripes, because al pi Kabbalah, there's no need for any of those black stripes. The talus should be all white. And so don't feel bad. I'll send you just a white talus. So that's quite interesting that Reb Levi was particular that the talus shouldn't have any black stripes. We know that Sephardic talesim tend to be just plain white. We know that there are those who have blue stripes. I'm talking about Ashkenazim, have the blue stripes. It makes more sense of zeichel tcheles. Okay, one more point about that. The Rebbe, when he wore his talus, would kind of roll in the sides of the talus onto his shoulder, rather than rolling the talus in a way outwards, so to speak, where the black stripes would be visible. They were more rolled in that way that the black stripes were less visible from the back. For sure, you couldn't see any black stripes. And those who know everything would say that the Rebbe would do so for the reason of that to follow his father's preference, that the talus should all be all white. So by rolling the black out of sight, so it's all white. Okay, let's go on to the next question. And someone asked me this past week that he noticed that during Yomtov, in the davening we say, when it comes and also in benching, we say it comes Chol HaMoed. So in Ya'ale v'Yovoi, both in benching and in davening, it's just B'Yom Chag HaSukkos Hazeh, and Yom Mikra Kodesh Hazeh is dropped. Whereas in Musaf, during Chol HaMoed, we say v'yom chakas Succos hazeh, v'yom mikra kodesh hazeh, not yom tov, yom mikra kodesh hazeh. So is Chol HaMoed mikra kodesh, or is it not mikra kodesh? This is the question which he was asking, and I was happy to be able to answer. I remember years ago, the late Rav Ashkenazi of Kfar Chabad had written about this, and he points to this seif in the beginning of Hilchos Shabbos in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch and Siman Reish Mem Beis. What is it? Well, he says here, let's read this. We have a few minutes. Let's read it carefully. We've got two requirements for Shabbos stipulated in the Nevi'im, and that's the idea of kovod and oineg, as it says for Karosol l'Shabbos, last Shabbos oineg l'toich Hashem mechubod, and but ikra min haTorah, it says Kadosh Hashem, the day which is holy for Hashem, which is sacred to Hashem. And then he says Shabbos is bichlal mikroi kodesh. Shabbos is included in the term mikroi kodesh, as we have the pasuk vayom hashiri Shabbos Shabbos and mikra kodesh. What does mikra kodesh mean? The pasuk in Yeshaya, which we mentioned before. What does it mean mikra kodesh? So pirshu chachomim lekadshoyu lechabdoi, to sanctify the Shabbos, to honor the Shabbos with clean clothes, and right. So that's one meaning of mikra kodesh, to honor this day with clean clothes, etc. But yesh oimrim, and there are those who say no, mikra kodesh refers to isur asiyas melacha. The sacredness of mikra kodesh means that not to do melacha on that day. So now we've got these two meanings of mikra kodesh, and now the question is Chol HaMoed called mikra kodesh? I'm sorry I didn't review all these details properly before this shiur. But here the Alter Rebbe in note Zayin, this idea of mikra kodesh, he refers to the Sefer HaChinuch, and he says Chol HaMoed lo nema boy mikra kodesh. Chol HaMoed is not referred to as mikra kodesh. It's korui mikra kodesh. There's a whole pilpul in the Gemara Chagiga there. Le'inyan karbonos bilvad. In relation to karbonos, Chol HaMoed is called mikra kodesh. But as a day of being sanctified, certainly isur melacha, that's not true for Chol HaMoed. Melacha, all right, some melachas are permitted. It's not like Shabbos and Yomtov. So the full mikra kodesh does not apply to Chol HaMoed, only in the context of karbonos. I remember discussing with Rav Ashkenazi, what do you mean by for karbonos? And the way he understood was that mikra kodesh means you call people to gather around for this special occasion, and the idea of gathering people in honor of the karbonos. So, whereas other days perhaps not, but on Yomtov, where the Yomtov is called mikra kodesh, so for the korban there would be an emphasis of getting a crowd of people to be present at those korbanos. So therefore, to conclude our point here, the concept of mikra kodesh on Chol HaMoed is only in the context of korbanos, which now explains why in Musaf, which is commemorating the extra korbanos of the Yomtov, of the Moed, which is the Chol HaMoed also, therefore in Musaf it's called Yom Mikra Kodesh Hazeh. But at benching or at the other three tefillas, Shachas, Mincha, Ma'ariv, they are not associated with the korbanos. Chol HaMoed is not called Mikra Kodesh in that context. So that's, I think fairly clear, very brief, but I think very clear that Chol HaMoed is only Mikra Kodesh in relation to korbanos, and therefore Mikra Kodesh is only mentioned at Musaf in Chol HaMoed. Okay, let's go on. So someone writes to me just yesterday. He asks me, why is it that on Rosh, was it yesterday, was Rosh Chodesh, it was 2 days ago, whatever. He writes to me, why is it that on Rosh Chodesh, well, we have a rearrangement of the sequence of davening, where we normally, on a regular weekday, it's Ashri of Zion and then Shir Shel Yoim. On Rosh Chodesh, right after Hallel, we say Shir Shel Yoim. And after Kriyas Torah, Asher Volatzin, then we go into Musa. But that wasn't his main question. His main question was about why is Beis Yaakov, Yehei Hashem Elokeinu, and Shir HaMa'alos LeDavid, why are those items dropped on Rosh Chodesh? So the change of sequence, I told him there's actually a fascinating letter of the Rebbe. This is in Igros Chelik Beis and published various other places, where the Rebbe goes through the Seder of Davening, Alpit Halocha and Kabbalah, and he explains very carefully, clearly why the Alter Rebbe put Shir Shoyim where he put it. As you know, that Nusach Ashkenaz have Shir Shoyim after davening totally, whatever. And it's going, that's all Alpit Halocha and Kabbalah. But meanwhile, let's keep to the one question: why is Beis Yaakov missed out on Rosh Chodesh? And I pointed out to him that also on Tisha B'Av, where at Mincha, before Mincha, we make up for the pieces missed at Shachris. So we say Shir Shel Yoim and we say Kaveh, but we do not say, it's not spelt out, and we don't say Beis Yaakov when we resume the davening on Tisha B'Av at Mincha. And what I told him is that, look at those words, Beis Yaakov L'chu v'neilcha b'oir Hashem. Let's go in the light of Hashem. All the other nations, each one goes in the name of their God, and we go out in the name of Hashem. May Hashem be with us, as he was with our forefathers. He shouldn't neglect us, etc. And so the way I felt is that these pieces are being said as we're nearing the end of davening. We're about to go out. That's also why Aleinu L'Shabeach is said at the end of davening. Before we go out to the street, we acknowledge that we are the Eibish's children and Aleinu L'Shabeach, and we're not like the Goyim Harotzos. That's, by the way, why the Goyim actually hated the Aleinu L'Shabeach. As you may know, there were times where there was decrees to stop saying Aleinu L'Shabeach. A whole story with the Baal Shem Tov, with the Reb Chaim HaKohen Rappaport. At any rate, so this is a similar vein. You're about to go out. So you're saying Beis Yaakov. On Rosh Chodesh, you're not ready to go out yet. You still have Musaf ahead. And as therefore, you don't say those pieces. Similarly on Tisha B'Av, when you're just starting your resumption of davening, so you're not going out, so there's no point in saying Beis Yaakov L'chu v'neilcha. You're not going anywhere. You're actually going to stay now. You're going to put on your Rashis and daven Mincha with Kriyas Torah, etc. You're not going anywhere. That's the way I answered him. I took out the Shara HaKoilel, who's slightly different. He says it's a slightly different idea. He says that these prayers are, he says that they are tefillas, that your tefillah should be accepted. You're finishing off the davening, and it's a tefillah that your tefillah should be accepted. So again, it's the same idea that it's your ending davening. So because they're at the end of davening, that's why they are said. When Shir Shoyim is said earlier on, so it's not the end of davening. That's why those three pieces are dropped. Okay, let's go on here, and here we have I got a question just yesterday, and that is that a child was involved in a car accident and Baruch Hashem was not harmed. And does the child have to say Birchas HaGoimel? So here we have from the Alter Rebbe's Seder Birchas HaNe'enim. And he says, so the question was whether the child should say Birchas HaGoimel, should the father say Birchas HaGoimel? So here we have a clear psak that a koton ein tzorich lohoidos, a child does not say Birchas HaGoimel, afilu higia lechinuch mitzvah, even if it's old enough for chinuch to say brachas, still should not say Birchas HaGoimel. The reason for this is because the bracha is saying HaGoimel lechayovim toivus. He's giving those who are culpable, he gave them good. A child is not culpable. A child is not chayiv. And therefore, there's no point in him saying HaGoimel lechayovim toivus. Then there's a further aspect that a child, if chas v'sholom there's a tragedy with a child, sometimes it's got to do with the parent. It says in Chazal in some places that sometimes a parent is punished, Rahman al-Islam, and it's through the child's suffering. And therefore, that's another argument. If the child would say, who says you're chayiv bichlal? Perhaps what's happened to you, the trauma which you went through, that wasn't bichlal your geschäft. It was your parents' account, which unfortunately you were paying. And therefore, those are the arguments about not saying why should the father not be saying? Well, simply, on the other hand, there is this idea of thanksgiving should be personal. The person himself who had the trauma should be the one who should be saying the thanks, and someone else would not be able to say that they are, they're the chayovim, and as a result, what we don't find delegating. The birchas hagoyma we don't find, certainly not in our circles, about delegating. I have heard in some yeshivas, it comes the beginning of the Zman, and all the Bachrim who come from overseas all want to say birchas hagoyma. I said, but yeshiva, 400 Bachrim, it can take an hour for everyone to say birchas hagoyma. So in some yeshivas, they have that one Bachar says hagoyma on behalf of everyone. Other poskim are not happy with that at all. And they're saying that no, it has to be that each person has to say their own hagoyma. Thanking through someone else is not adequate. You should be actually thanking on your own. Finish off. You can hear the music outside, so I'm going to try Bima Katzer, and that is about saying Leisha Vasuka at Havdalah. The way I left it last week was that in the Rishimas, it looks like the heter of saying Leisha Vasuka at Havdalah is associated with the fact that they were going to eat shortly afterwards. And that was how it was in the Rishimas from Tzadik Aleph, from Tzadik Zayin, etc. But then someone pointed out to me that, I remember this myself, that I think it was Tov Mem Gimel, I think it was that year, and at the end of Ma'ariv, at the end of, whether it was the second night of Yomtov or Shabbos Chol HaMoed, and there was a surprise. In 770 downstairs, right, we're near the front, and suddenly we hear a very loud voice. There was Reb Yudel Kel Olav Shalom, and what they did behind the Rebbe's place by the Fabrengen, there are those colored windows, horizontal slats, and they took out one of those units where the air conditioners were, somewhere around there, and they built a small sukkah at the back of the shul, and Rabbi Keller had such a powerful voice that he was able to say Havdalah in the sukkah at the back of 770. You could hear him clearly all the way at the front. It was like quite a novelty at the time. And apparently, apparently the Rebbe had once asked, why didn't he say Leisha Vasuka? That's what I'm told. This is all hearsay. And subsequently, he would say Leisha Vasuka. Also here we have in the Oitzim and Hoge Chabad, in Tovshin Dalet, Shalom Chaskin is saying that the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe said to say Leisha Vasuka. He doesn't talk about whether with a meal or not. And Rabbi Monshein Olav Shalom, he also says that the Rebbe, when he saw in Tovshin Chavtes, told people to say Leisha Vasuka at Havdalah. Again, I don't know whether it was near a meal or not, and who it was. I don't know the details. So I'm left with an interesting dilemma. How did this morph? If in the tzaddiks in the 1930s, this seemed to be associated dafka with a subsequent meal, how did it then morph to with the confidence you say Leisha Vasuka at Havdalah even when there's no meal associated? I don't know how that developed, and I'm curious. And meanwhile, I'm going to wish you a good night, a good Shabbos, and a good Chodesh, and alle gute Sachen, and we should meet in good health. Next week, this is important, next week, we changed the clock, this Motzei Shabbos, apparently. And so next week, I want to switch to the Motzei Shabbos slot. Instead of Thursday night, to have the shiur on Motzei Shabbos. And I hope that's going to be okay with you and with I hope for hopefully more people. I will be out of the country, so I hope to be able to. And I would like to do it at 7:30 rather than 8:30 to allow the rest of the evening to do other activities. I'll keep you posted, Bez Hashem, closer to the time. And so I wish you all a good Shabbos, a Zeit alle Gesund.